So welcome to the channel. I'm really
Thank you.
happy to have you on the show today. And I'm really just grateful to hear more about your program and mindfulness because I know others have said too that this is one of the biggest struggles for
Hmm.
ADHD. I had someone just last night ask me about mindfulness, and then I said, "It's so funny. I'm talking to somebody who's going to have way more knowledge about it than I do." Did have some experience with it when I was studying in the Buddhist temple. One of my special interests for quite some time was
Uh,
meditation, but that
yeah,
was different. It was more of like a special interest and just a thing I did than a practice.
right. Okay. You were just learning about it
I
rather
was
than
just
using it for a life
something
thing.
I was into at the time, and then
Yeah,
and it did help me because I was coming off of an addiction. Like, I don't drink anymore; it just doesn't work for me.
yeah,
So it was to help calm the nerves as I'm detoxing from alcohol.
yeah.
But
Right.
besides that, I really haven't done mindfulness in a
Yeah,
long time. So I'm
yeah,
really curious about that. And you do many other things too. So I'll let you introduce yourself, and we can go from there.
yeah. Okay. So I'm Liezl Laidlaw. I'm in Scotland, and I work online as a therapist, mindfulness tutor, ADHD-ers. So, um, therapy is my main job, but I do two courses of mindfulness for ADHDers a year, one in February and one in September. And the reason I do that is because mindfulness is, in fact, what brought me here. I used to do lots of other things for work. If you've ever had a look at my background, you'll know it's very squiggly. Um, it wasn't a straight line from leaving school to getting here. Um, and it was because of mindfulness I started asking myself all kinds of hard questions that I hadn't even considered before then. And the questions all led to whose rules are these anyway? Um, why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you leaving the house at 5:30 in the morning when you've got a small person in it and coming back at just about 7 o'clock at night when they're already asleep? Why are you doing that? Who's it for? And that's what changed. And it's because of mindfulness that I changed my career. I went from working in change management and financial services to retraining as a therapist and becoming a mindfulness tutor so that I could support other people in the ways that I needed to be supported earlier in my life. And it's through all of that that I became aware that I'm an ADHDer.
Ah,
Um,
so you became
because,
aware during that process.
yeah, exactly. It was because I was becoming more aware of myself. I was learning more about myself that I was able to start seeing the patterns better. I mean, I'm quite an age, right? So you'd imagine you'd see these patterns by now. But no. So that's how I got to mindfulness, and that's why it's so important for me to offer it to other neurodivergent people, specifically ADHDers, because I know the transformative joy it can bring. It's hard as well. It didn't just plop in here by accident, but the the joy of knowing yourself and being yourself is really lovely.
Mhm. So, are there any activators that you can just sort of give us a little preview of just to
Sure.
kind of set the mood there?
Well, I guess the first thing to say is some of your listeners won't have a clue about what mindfulness is. So let's start them off on that and then give them a little taster,
Good idea. Yeah,
if that's okay with you.
that's great.
So there's a few different ways of referring to mindfulness, but for me, it's basically noticing what's going on in the moment without judging it. Or you could say checking in with yourself regularly and not judging it. And so there's a whole load of different ways you can do that. It doesn't have to be just sitting in meditation, right? You don't have to just be sitting bolt upright, eyes at 45 degrees, and that's your lot for an hour. Um, Mindfulness can be practiced in many other ways. So when you make yourself a cup of tea, you can do you can practice mindfulness by paying attention intentionally to what you're doing without judging it.
Mhm.
So if you spilled the sugar, you go, I spilled the sugar and carry on. There's no, I spilt the sugar. Oh my goodness, what a klutz. There's, right? You
Right.
just notice it, do what you need to do, and do that for the period of making the cup of tea. And then you know when you've done the cup of tea, you don't have to do any more of it. It's okay to take a break from that as well. Um, Putting your shoes on to go out the house, feeling what the shoe feels like before you put it on your foot. Sitting down, feeling the ground under your backside if you sit down, feeling how it feels to put your foot into the shoe, noticing what it's like as you're lacing it up, noticing how you're changing your weight from one foot to another as you're getting up. It's all paying attention to the body and the senses. Um, and then later on, you can add in things like thoughts and feelings and so on to try and be aware of the whole being without judging.
Is this intended to slow us down a little and or just bring us to the present? A little both?
Paying attention intentionally kind of slows you down anyway. Yeah, so the question was, is mindfulness intended to slow us down?
Yeah.
Um, and actually, it's not necessarily about slowing down. It helps, it makes it easier. And it sort of comes as a byproduct of paying attention. Um, it helps to do it slowly, but you don't have to. For ADHDers, doing anything slowly can be hard. So don't. You know, we need to find a way of making this accessible to ourselves. So
Yeah.
if doing it slowly makes you feel like you've got ants crawling up your arms, then don't do that, right?
Yeah.
Um, if just paying attention for a specific period of time to something that you're interested in, is something that you can commit to, then do that.
Hmm.
Um, mindfulness usually involves formal mindfulness usually involves focusing on the breath. But for some people, focusing on the breath can bring up all kinds of difficulty, right? So you might find some other way of focusing on the body. You might include movement so that the breath isn't the only thing you're paying attention to. You might include other things to focus on. So at the same time as something visual, you might choose something audible. Um, there's loads of different ways of using your senses to be mindful in the moment, but we find our own way as we go. It just helps to do it with other people because you can learn a lot from them as well.
Yeah. I like the three fingers technique. If I'm
Hmm.
getting anxious or just need to regroup and
Yeah.
my thoughts are going all over the place, I just put my three fingers together. I learned that somewhere along the way and
Uh-huh.
sort of calms me, levels me, grounds me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something you're doing
Sometimes
intentionally, right? You choose it.
yeah, yeah. And then
Mm.
sometimes it just comes naturally. It's habitual.
Yeah. So for us, there's loads of ways that ADHDers are often going through the world fidgeting, right?
Mhm.
And maybe we've been told as children to stop it. Don't do that. Sit still. And as a result, there might be an awful lot of shame associated with fidgeting, whereas I'm doing it all right now.
Yeah.
And what it does when you're fidgeting intentionally is that you're using your senses to settle yourself into something that is grounded, something that is real, rather than getting lost in thoughts and feelings that might not have anything to do with what's going on right now.
Right.
Um,
Taking
so for you, if it's, sorry,
taking away the judgment part of it element.
yeah, you don't have to get in the middle of that. It takes up a lot of energy and time.
Mhm.
And we've got stuff to do, so let's not waste time on that.
I agree. It could bring up a lot, and now that, I'm hearing a lot about the rejection sensitivity
Hmm.
disorder, which I can relate to a lot of that just because I've had a lot of negative comments about myself growing up. So it's all there in my subconscious, no matter how much I've worked on it in cognitive behavior therapy sessions, it still will come up, especially if something happens with a friend, whether it's a close friend or and there's a misunderstanding. Oh my goodness. And I just start shaming myself.
Sure,
And,
yeah.
oh, it's terrible.
Yeah, that not good enough driver that comes from all those experiences we've had throughout our lives can become pretty big and overwhelming. Um, whereas learning to be okay with observing what's going on in the moment helps us to take a beat before we decide what to do next. And very often that's all that's necessary to be able to recognize, ah, no, hang on. I made a mistake. That's not quite what's going on here. And actually, if I had taken the step I was going to, I would have made it worse. Um, so this helps us to save a lot of effort to try and make ourselves look more acceptable than we think we are, when actually we didn't need to do any of that in the first place.
Oh, interesting. All right, so I can ask another question.
Go on then.
It's kind of related. What is RSD in your experience, and have you gone through it in any
Mhm.
way, shape, or form, or how do you deal with that with your clients?
Yeah, so rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's not actually a thing listed in the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual. However, ADHDers know all about it, so it's a thing. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria comes from um, feeling very sensitive to rejection. And the reason we feel very sensitive to rejection is because we've had lots of it. So we can spot it a mile off and we prepare for it and we are ready for it this time because this time I'm not going to get hurt. And actually, what that does is it predisposes us to emotionally responding to things in a way that maybe is beyond what's expected. Um, and then that adds to the situation where people might be giving us some negative feedback as well. And it doesn't necessarily do what we need it to do. There's loads of reasons why people feel rejection sensitive, right? If you're late diagnosed or late recognized as an ADHD, because not everyone has a diagnosis, some people are self-recognized, and that's entirely okay. Um, if you came to that recognition late in life, you've had a while before that, in some cases, decades of people telling you off for things that are just innate part of you, something that you cannot change. Now, if you think about all the other kind of discriminations there are in the world, when it's particularly obvious to see what it is people are discriminating against, our particular way of being is a very hard thing to defend because you can't see it. And unless people know what they're looking for, they might think you're lazy or you're stupid or you're sick. Um, and none of those things are praised in the media, are they? No, nobody says at school, you know what? Wouldn't it be awesome if you could be an ADHD?
Mhm.
Not that there's anything wrong with being an ADHD, but our society doesn't prize it yet.
Mhm.
We haven't got to the point yet where we recognize that actually, do you know what? Everyone's made up of lots of fantastic bits. Some of them are really awesome. Some of them are not what we'd really prefer. Um, but we're not all the same and we complement each other. We're like an ecosystem of different types of brains.
Hmm.
And so it's important that we have ADHDers at one end of that spectrum who do all the things that ADHDers do, right? Firefighters, ambulance workers, uh, people in ER. Those are the kinds of folk who are very likely to be ADHDers. Oh, and all your entertainers.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the percentage of people in the entertainment industry who are ADHDers is phenomenal.
And
Um,
teachers. I'm a
t
special ed teacher, so I'm
yeah,
always running around with behavior needs, is particularly in emotional behavior. So I'm
yeah,
like, gotta go, gotta go.
yeah, exactly. You're ready to go as soon as there's something going on. You're the person running at it instead of away from it, right? Yeah. So because we're not used to living in a world that praises the ways in which ADHDers show up, recognizing that that's a link, that those wonderful things that those people do are linked to them being ADHDers, we don't have a positive association with it. The other things that people see in ADHDers is perhaps at school, and you'll see this, a bit of chatting, a little bit of difficulty paying attention to what's going on in the class, then missing instructions. Then because they've missed the instructions, they can't actually carry on with the thing they're supposed to be doing. So then they distract everyone else around about them, and they're hilarious while they're doing it. Either that or breaking things. And you know, that's nobody's going to go, oh, that's great. You do more of that. But what they're not seeing is that people miss great chunks of education because nobody spotted the first problem that the child is unable to pay attention to what's going on because it's boring.
Right. Yeah. I think
So
teachers are
it
recognizing,
starts as early as that.
but I think it's getting better in some districts. I
Mm,
do see teachers recognizing it more and
mm,
adapting their lessons. But yeah,
mm.
it's still there. There's still a stigma.
Sure.
Yeah, it's tough. you know,
So yeah, that's where RSD comes from, right? Is all those years of people pointing out things about you that you can't change, and then adding some negative meaning to that.
yeah.
So in adulthood, when we see the risk of being seen as different, when we see the risk of not matching up to the expectation, whether that be our expectation or society's expectation, we tend to either work harder so that we do match up, or we hide the thing that we don't want people to see. And
Mm.
both of those things take up a lot of energy, and they mean that we're not showing up as our authentic self. We mask.
Or even for myself, I think I went the other extreme, which was
Mm,
to highlight my eccentricities and go even farther down the rabbit hole. And okay, so you're going to
mm.
judge me, so I'm going to get
Yeah,
myself caught up in drugs and alcohol and,
literally hold my beer.
literally. Yeah. So I went down that rabbit hole for years,
Yeah.
right. It was like during my college years, so I kind of got
Mm,
away with it, but
mm,
it wasn't good. It really messed with my whole development. And so,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it was a real impact. And I found that only through real, like, deep trauma work, some of that stuff finally, like,
Mm,
healing.
mm,
Yeah, it took
mm,
a lot. And because just even in my childhood, there was so many things that I got picked on for. Like I used to love to run. So
mm,
I would like run to the buses or I'd run and I used to smile a lot. I still do. Now I'm finally back to smiling again, but
yeah.
I tried to force myself to stop smiling so much because people would say I have horse teeth and I smile too much. And it was just,
Oh,
and they thought I was being fake, but I'm really not. I just can't
yeah,
help it
that's just what
how
you
I
were doing.
am. And
Yeah.
I really like to run, but
Yeah.
I would run at inappropriate times,
Yeah.
get in trouble
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah. And there's probably good reason why you liked running, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps you needed to burn up some energy that was
Yes. I
going to
was,
get you in trouble when you had to sit still.
yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the other thing to mention is, and I'm sure you've said this on the podcast before, that there's a high probability of co-occurring addiction with
Yeah,
ADHD.
there is. Yep.
We're predisposed. It's more likely for an ADHD to have an addiction than the rest of the population.
Yep.
Um, but we also know that that's down to an unmet need. That's
Mhm.
not because somebody, has some kind of personal failing.
Mhm.
It's society has failed them in the first place, and that's why they're finding some way of self-medicating, some way of finding comfort, some way of settling things for themselves.
Mhm.
But it doesn't work out because there's physical issues associated with all that.
So you're a real advocate, I see. Mm.
Oh yeah. I think having lived for so long without knowing made me kind of brave when I when I had the tools, when I became aware of what's going on here. The other thing that ADHDers really feel strongly is an injustice driver. If there's injustice,
Mhm.
do you want to know who's going to argue about it?
Yeah, true.
And so part of the reason I do what I do is because I've lived through so much of that injustice, so much of difficulty at work that could have been sorted out if I knew what was going on and I knew how to speak up for myself.
Mm.
Um, if other people knew how they could support me, because I'm quite sure everybody in that situation really would like the best outcome.
Mhm. Sure.
Um, but unless everybody knows, where the other one's coming from, you're not going to find a middle ground.
Mm.
Um, and so now what I'm able to do through therapy and through mindfulness is get people to really get to know themselves, understand where their patterns come from, what it gives them, but also what it costs them,
Mm.
um, so that they can make better choices for themselves, so that they can be more reliable for themselves.
Yeah, and I used to be someone who really cowered to any authority figure, even in my young adulthood, as having
Mhm.
supervisors and whatnot. And I feel like they could almost smell the fear, and it would make things worse. I would get my ADHD symptoms would exasperate, and I would ask so many questions that put me in this pigeonholed me as like someone who just didn't know that much. Not stupid, but girl like, didn't study her craft, or I don't know. I just felt like that a lot of the time. Like, they don't
Mhm.
understand that I am intelligent. They'll say things that just sounds so uneducated or why? Why am
Yeah.
I doing this? Is it fear? Is it?
Yeah.
I've learned a lot about myself through the process. And that's
Hmm.
why when I see someone else struggling, I think another thing that we have is a real gift for empathy. One person I see sometimes, I don't want to say where, but she's always worried about what people think. And some people are like, will say things about her. I'm like, no, she's really awesome.
Yeah.
And I always tell her, like, when she worries about something, oh, I hope I didn't offend you. I say, trust me, I'm unoffendable at this point. And the fact that she would say that is so humble of her in the first place. Like, trust
Yeah.
me, you're not, you're fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm used to
That's
a lot of
that's a
rejection.
clear thing that happens to ADHDers, right? Because we're having to measure up the whole time, our value starts becoming an external thing instead of internal.
Hmm.
We start believing that we must please other people in order to be valuable as humans.
Hmm.
If I don't get praise at work, if I don't get praise from parents or teachers or coaches or whoever I'm working with, then I'm not measuring up. So a lot of really high performing people are ADHDers, and many of them are doing it for external praise or achievement, right?
Hmm.
Um, and if that's what you're basing your value on, what will happen at some point is somebody's going to go, no, that's not good enough, or I didn't like that. Um, and then you haven't got a leg to stand on because there isn't anything internal that holds you up.
Hmm.
Whereas if we're able to recognize that learning is, in fact, a series of mistakes, then we become quite comfortable with making mistakes. And we learn that it's okay not to ask 40,000 questions about it because I'm going to muck this up somehow. Um, some of it would be great if I already had some structure for how to work on it, but when I do, it's okay because I'm going to learn things.
Hmm.
Now, look, learning from other people's mistakes is a lot easier than learning from your own. But some of us are just not built that way. So it's going to take us longer and it's going to be really hard to get there. But every mistake we make is one in the right direction. And then the knowledge you have is your very own. Then you get to go, I know that in my bones because I lived it.
Hmm.
Whereas if I know it because somebody else told me and I got praise for regurgitating what they told me, it's not mine. And it, you know, I can easily misunderstand what's going on there.
Like when I think I can multitask, so I take on three different roles when I'm supposed to be just taking care of one. And then
Yeah,
because I chose to multitask, I get to the classroom that I'm supposed to be at late and
yeah.
get a little reprimanded for it.
Mhm.
I wonder what happened? Did I self-sabotage again?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Who did that? Oh,
How
well,
many
hold on.
times that happened? Oh,
You
man.
are not alone. I work for myself, so I've got the best boss in the world, right?
That's
Um,
awesome.
she is really, really good. Um, apart from when she gives me more to do than I actually have time for, because time waviness is a thing for us. And I really genuinely believe I can do 10 things in 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's scary.
God, yeah. So I need to find ways of making sure that I don't. I need to put things in place to help myself not to do that. Now, here's the thing, mindfulness really helps with that
Okay.
because as you learn, as you become your own observer, as you become more objective about what's going on in your life, it's easier to look at the pitfalls and go, yeah, I spot that pattern. I did that there. I did that there. The outcome is that. Oh, okay. Next time I recognize this thing coming at me again, I might do something different. And here's what my plan is. But we can't do that until we've seen the original pattern. So
Right.
you'll know the Buddhists say the seeing is the doing.
Yeah.
Um, as soon as you're aware of it, you can start making change, but not before.
Yeah, I have a question. Are apps good for ADHD? This is gonna not black and white answer for this, or is it
Sure.
bad? Because I see so many different pop-up ads right now telling me
Yeah.
I should get this calendar app because it'll help
Oh,
ADHD,
yeah.
get this Headspace app because it'll
Yeah.
help. But that at the same time, I just feel like something inside me is saying, well, no, just set an alarm and then go do the thing, instead
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
because for me, if I have too much, I know
Yeah.
it can be a distraction, but I don't know
I
if you
bet that for two
experience
weeks it will make you a superhuman.
for 2 weeks.
And the reason I say that is because we are very interested in novelty. So
Yeah.
when the thing's new, oh my word, it gets all our attention, right?
Yeah.
There is not another thing that's as entertaining as the thing that we have just started this week. Oh, so good. Except then what we'll find is after about 2 weeks, especially if it's an app, um, you'll get used to it.
Mhm.
And then your brain's going to go, no, that's boring. And I don't do boring. So
Delete it.
watch how I take none of this information in. Watch how I sabotage you when you think you're going to go and do it. Watch
Mhm.
how I go, oh, there's an interesting thing over there. Go and do that instead.
Mhm.
So yeah, for 2 weeks, best thing ever. And then after that, not so much.
Mm.
So that combined with the impulsivity that we often experience means that we can spend an awful lot of money on stuff we're never going to use again.
Mm.
Go and tell me about your journals. Go and tell me about your hobbies. And go and tell me about all the apps you've ever bought and never used. Um, that's evidence of how this goes.
Mm.
So I'm not saying don't use an app. If you found an app to be consistently useful to you, for goodness sake, tell everyone.
Mm. I haven't.
However, learning mindfulness in a group is more sustaining because you get a tiny little bit of accountability. If you're going to be meeting once a week, you're going to be talking about mindfulness, right? You're not just going to be talking about what you had for dinner.
Mm.
Um, and so you might say, oh, this week I did that or I did this. My experience of my practice this week was this. And if you don't have anything to talk about when you get there, it's going to feel uncomfortable.
Mm.
Bit of discomfort is not a bad thing.
Mm.
It's part of life. However, it also means that you might meet some other people who go, oh, I could not get to a cushion this week. I could not make myself sit still.
Mhm.
And then you've got community, which makes it a whole lot more accessible than that kind of critical self-talk that we might give ourselves because we've had so many years of it elsewhere.
Mm. Yeah. It's reminding me of like some Brother Lawrence. I don't know if you've read his stuff, Practice the Presence of God or something like that. But it's all
Mm,
about this monk on the
yeah.
mountaintops, just was
Mm,
hearing God more clearly. And he would start doing the dishes. And it reminds me of like Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance or something. It just focusing on the dishes would get
yeah.
him in hysterics. Like the joy comes from knowing who we are, like this the spirit sense. He just had all these experiences, which and at one point in my life I was very into experiences. But again, like you mentioned before,
Yeah.
they become it's a novelty, it comes, it
Yeah.
goes. So
Sure.
but yeah, it's
Yeah.
all good, but in moderation for me. If I go down a rabbit hole of one particular thing, it can totally derail me from my actual goals for here and now kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
but
there's another link, right, with mindfulness because every time you do a formal practice, you set yourself an intention. Here's what I'm here to do right now. This is what I'm here to do. And you also look at what your motivation is. What
yeah,
is it that makes me want to do this, right? And
absolutely.
whenever we want to create change, anything in life, we need to know what it is we want to achieve. And
Mm-hmm.
we need to know why that's important to us.
Yeah.
We need to know what our motivation is. And for ADHDers, there's five things that drive us. One is novelty. The other is it important to me? Not is it important to me? Is it a challenge? In other words, like a game, right? Is it a challenge? Can I do this? Yeah, can I put all the towels away in 5 minutes? Let's go, right? I'm never going to do it if it's not fun.
Yep.
Is it urgent? I.e., have I got coursework to do? And am I going to do it a month before? Am I going to do it the night before? Yeah, of course I'm going to do it the night before. That's when I get my motivation. Um, and have I got passion for it? So if we have passion for something, the rest of the world disappears.
Mm-hmm.
You know yourself, if you're doing work that you're passionate about, you can't stop. Self-care goes out the window because you're too busy doing this thing that's really so good. If we can include any of those things in our motivation, we've got a much better chance of sticking to something. So that's why I was saying if your app is only going to rely on novelty to last,
Mm-hmm.
you've got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But what we could do is go, well, I've got a whole series of different things that I use and I will cycle through them. So for example, this app I know is going to work for 2 weeks, so I'll do that for 2 weeks. Perhaps this meeting group is something I'll do for 2 weeks and go do that for 2 weeks. Then perhaps you'll do some kind of, I don't know, mindful walking for 2 weeks and eventually cycle back to the beginning with your app so
Mm.
that it's always new.
Yeah.
You always remember what it was you gained from that and you can go back to it.
Mm.
For us, having a practice doesn't have to look the same all the time.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I'm in the middle of a practice right now with finances. I'm doing a
Mm,
budget this month.
mm,
I'm really paying attention to my budget.
mhm, mm, mm.
And so that's going really well, and I'm really proud of myself. And
Oh,
I
good.
say that not sarcastically, only a
Yeah.
little bit sarcastically, because the thing that I like about it is that I'm actually making myself aware that when I go into the red zone, this is how it's going to feel. So I'm like feeling the tension in my body, and I'm like, oh,
Sure.
so if I spend, I am going
Mm,
to feel this rather
yeah.
than just spending and then wondering, hey, why do I feel funny? Like, well, that's probably why you're overspending or whatnot. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like
Yeah.
right in your face when you have the app that tells you, oh, you're going a little overboard there. So,
Sure. It's
yeah,
the awareness. It's being able to see it. You can't make change until you see
yeah,
it.
gotta
And
see.
if you can see it in inverted commas because you can feel it in your body,
Yep.
you can notice your thoughts, you can recognize your feelings, your emotions, then you're much more likely to be able to catch it in time.
Hmm.
If not, it might be afterwards, and then you can kind of retrofit. You can eventually catch up, so it happens in the moment. But we can learn from the past. We don't have to learn instantly if we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you can use all your senses to learn, you're going to learn so much faster than if you're just trying to use one thing.
My other question was about anxiety. Sometimes we can be looked at as an anxious person. And the
Uh-huh.
thing is, I'm personally not an anxious person,
Hmm.
but I come across as an anxious person sometimes
Sure.
because of my demeanor. And I've always felt very annoyed by that. And I don't get annoyed easily either. Like I'm pretty
Oh,
easygoing, but I just wish I could explain it to people. No, I'm
yeah.
I'm really not anxious. I just
Hmm.
always
You're being
like
misrepresented, right?
yeah, it's like you feel
Yeah.
like you're misrepresented, and I just love to hear, someone else who maybe has felt this way, or
Mm.
someone who's felt this way, and what to do about it.
The joyful thing about me is that I've been through it. Which is why I'm here. Um, but also I work with ADHDers who are anxious every day.
Yeah.
And the anxiety shows up in different ways. But I'm interested to hear in what it is that people say, what people recognize in you that makes them think that you're anxious.
When I'm really absorbed in something that I like, and
Hmm.
I'm doing it, and maybe it's just the look in my eyes or whatever, and they think that I'm really anxious or hype. I mean, I guess it's because I'm a hyper person,
Mm.
so I mean, I've also gotten that. What did you down 5 cups of coffee or something? People
Okay,
that don't
right.
know me, and so
Ah,
then I get
okay.
myself into the predicament. Oh, I have to explain this, or
Yeah,
nobody likes to
yeah.
be judged. No,
No,
I'm just like this.
just just me. So, right, along with the fidgeting, there's, a lot of ADHDers that are the fast acting kind, right? They're doing things at 100 miles an hour, and that's just their speed.
Yeah.
Um, and for many other people, for neurotypical people, the only time they do it like that is when they're anxious.
Hmm.
So they're projecting onto ADHDers
Um,
that they must be anxious if they're behaving in that way.
I want to feel uncomfortable too. So then I end up trying to
Sure.
change myself and
Yeah.
be calm, be
Yeah.
even calmer.
Sure. How comfortable do you feel when that happens?
Not
Yeah.
comfortable.
No, exactly. You don't get to be your authentic self then.
Hmm.
So here's you were saying about empathy. And yes, the ADHDers are full of empathy because we've been in all kinds of situations where we could have done with some, right? So we're the people who are going to go, oh, you've had a terrible time. Come here, have a coffee. Whatever's happening for someone else, we're gonna be there to try and support them because we've been through it ourselves. The difficulty with that is if you happen to be one of those ADHDers with their value coming from the outside, what you need is for this to go well. You need the other person to feel better. You need the other person to have a better experience than the one they've got. Otherwise, you failed, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Which means you could end up in a cycle where you're doing so much more than you actually have time, money, or energy for, that you end up overcommitting to something that really isn't appropriate for you to do
Hmm.
and maybe unhelpful to the other person because you may not even have the skills that they need you to have
Hmm.
in order to help them. So this is where there's the difference between empathy and compassion.
Hmm.
Empathy says, I want you to feel better and I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen. Compassion goes, I want you to feel better. I'm going to do what I can within my boundaries.
Hmm.
I know how much I can spend, how much energy I've got. I know how much time I've got. I know my skills, and I'm not going to cross those boundaries. If you need something that's out of those boundaries, I'll help you find it.
Mm.
But for us, unfortunately, we don't get, well, not everyone gets taught the difference between empathy and compassion, and it can end up costing you.
Boundaries are tough, either being
Yeah,
on either side of it.
yeah.
And I've experienced that where I've been either codependent on someone else or someone else has been codependent on me. And it's hard to get out of when you're in that cycle,
Mm-hmm,
for
mm-hmm.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another way mindfulness can help us, right? If we're able to recognize what our motivation is, why is it I'm doing what I'm doing right now? What am I getting out of this?
Mhm.
Because there's no true altruism anywhere.
Mhm.
Um, People get something from doing nice things for other people. Feel nicer. They feel
Yeah.
valued. They feel needed. There's all kinds of reasons why people do
Mhm.
that. And yeah, all right, you're allowed to be nice to other people. That's a good thing to do. It changes the world.
Mhm.
But you need to be aware that you've got this little bit of yourself going, yeah, look at me, I'm a savior.
Yeah, pride. Yep.
And recognize when that's unhelpful, when that really is getting in the way of somebody else having a better experience.
Right. Giving them some space to breathe and
Yeah.
experience
Asking,
themselves. Yeah.
what
Yeah.
do you need? Rather than, you must do this. Here, come with me. We're going to do this thing, right?
Do it my way.
Yeah, exactly. This worked for me, so it must work for you.
Yeah. Well, trial and error has helped me, that's for sure. I've just
Sure.
seen, okay, I guess my way doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah.
Rats.
Yeah. Bother.
Okay.
That it's such a skill to learn the open question.
Mm,
When you want to be useful to other people, you need to learn the open question because
mm,
how, what, why, where, when is where is how we're going to get through stuff. Questions that end with an answer in yes or no just tells me what you think.
mm. So
Um,
you work with people all over the world, like online, I
yeah,
imagine.
that's right.
Yeah, that's
Hmm.
awesome. Have you noticed any cultural differences between Scottish and Americans and maybe all across the board? I bet you have. Just
Yeah, absolutely.
impulsive question, but I'm curious. I went to Australia for a year, so I
Yeah,
noticed a lot. And the Aussies
yeah,
were always picking on me because I would say things like, "Oh, I'm stuffed," and then that
yeah.
means you're full, but in
Sure,
Australia it means something else.
sure, sure. Yeah,
I'm
you're
like,
in trouble. You're
so
having a tough
yeah,
time.
I was wondering, anything like that ever come up?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd, look, every culture has their own way, right? And
No.
so you'll recognize similarities between people from a similar culture, but then every individual is just that. They're also not exactly the same.
Mhm.
So when I've worked with a variety of people from the same country, I will recognize some similarities. Like, for example, some countries are very into medicating anything they can, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Some cultures. Some cultures are very keen on doing everything the organic way as
Mhm.
much as they possibly can. Um, and I'm not saying one's good and the other one's bad. I'm just saying the culture is will be pervasive in the people from that area. Um, and so you need to be very sensitive when you're working with that because you're not trying to change people's mind on that, but you do need to try and find a way of recognizing when that thing is getting in their way,
Mhm.
when that cultural thing that is in fact a blind spot now because it's culture,
Mhm.
um, it needs some attention in this case, in this person's life, in this
Mhm.
moment. Um, the rules that we learn as we grow can feel like facts because we're so surrounded by them. So by the time we get to adulthood, we don't question those rules anymore. We just automatically use them. Of course, this means this means that.
Mhm.
I'm going to do this because this rule, right? But when that rule starts getting in our way, um, unless we have the opportunity to view it in its totality to see how it's either benefiting or not benefiting us, we can't make real decisions about our own rules anymore. Or yet, we're just following someone else's rules. And sometimes those rules are 200 years old.
Mhm.
And sometimes
Need some
those rules
reformation.
have nothing to do with your own life or
Yeah.
your real values.
Yeah. They
So
need
yeah, culture is important, and we need to be aware that everyone's culture gives them stuff like that.
no, no, it'll come to me. Oh,
Right, well,
that's
yeah,
another thing. I get these brain farts.
sure. And here's a fun thing that not everybody's aware of. and I'm not saying this applies to you. Let me step back from that right now. But for women, when we hit perimenopause,
Mhm.
and estrogen starts reducing, it starts interfering with our memory, and it
Ah.
increases an awful lot of our ADHD traits.
Hmm.
It starts mucking about with your dopamine, right? Because you need estrogen in order to process dopamine properly. So guess what? We run on dopamine. And if estrogen isn't enough, there isn't enough estrogen for you to process your dopamine, you can't use it properly. So really the things that used to make you happy won't make you happy anymore. So it's really important to recognize when those physical things start interfering with us, as ADHDers as a whole. Obviously, if you are a person who has a uterus, um, if you happen to be a person who has lost a uterus through surgery, then you will have gone through that in one go and you will know all about it, but it will be a sudden thing.
Mm.
Whereas for some other people that can creep up.
Mm.
Um, and it can feel, well, it can bring anxiety because
Mm.
we don't trust our bodies anymore because they're suddenly not doing what we used to.
Mm.
Memory doesn't work the way it used to. We're tired at times we wouldn't have been tired before.
Mm.
Um, our digestion doesn't work just quite the way we'd expect it to. And of course, all these ADHD things are exacerbated. So if you are a person with a uterus, I would highly recommend that if you are somewhere between 45 and 50-ish, 55 maybe, there's a high
Yeah,
chance that this is affecting you.
I'm gonna be 45 this year. Woo.
Ah,
Mhm.
welcome to the club. It can
Yeah.
happen anytime from 40 onwards,
Mhm.
but it hits hardest around about 45 onwards.
Yeah, I've heard that. I remember
Mm,
I was going to say the black and
yeah,
white. Do
yeah.
we see ADHD or see? I feel like there's like a line between ADHD and autism. There's now I'm researching a lot about autism. I work with
Mm,
autistic kids, and I'm
mm,
seeing some even autistic traits in myself. I never diagnosed or anything, but
mm,
I'm just interested to know
mm,
more. And is there maybe a blur between ADHD
mm.
and autism? And because sometimes I feel like I'm so in an autistic way, like black and white in my thinking. But then other
Yeah,
times I see the gray. It kind of
yeah,
depends on the
yeah.
situation, but I'm just
There's a
trying
lot of overlap, right? There are
to
things
overlap. That's
that overlap between ADHD and overlaps. You don't necessarily have to have autism and ADHD for you to have those similar experiences. But the stats say somewhere around about 40% or even more of ADHDers are also autistic.
hmm,
So, it's a high percentage. There's a high chance that there will also be some autism going on.
you're very social of a person, and
Oh, yeah.
hmm,
Uh-huh. So here's the thing, right? Not every ADHDer is a social person. Not every autistic person is not a social person.
right.
You
Okay.
know that saying, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person.
Ah, yeah, yeah, I have.
Yeah, it totally applies there, right? Some of the autistic people I know are the most outgoing people you know. Um, but it depends on the circumstances whether that's going to happen or not.
Hmm.
Um, it depends on whether they are also ADHD, in which case maybe right now the ADHD part is in the front because the circumstances lend themselves to that. But later on, when you see that person hiding in a room that's dimly lit, with soft things and reading a book very quietly,
Hmm.
then it may be that they've either overspent their spoons as an ADHD or actually now they're just supporting their autistic side.
Hmm. Hmm. It's like, wait, that's not something everyone does. That's
It's the same as saying, when people say, oh, when ADHDers talk about what their traits are, a lot of people go, oh, I do that, I do that. Yeah, that's normal, I do that. But it's the difference between blinking and sleeping. You know, people, if you're describing the traits that everyone has, you can liken that to blinking. Yeah, everybody does that. But if you're actually closing your eyes for a long time and unable to see or recognize what's going on around about you because of a condition like ADHD, I'm kind of getting lost in this analogy, but um, basically that's the difference. It's the same action, but it's more severe. It's more impactful to your life. If it's impacting you, then it's more likely to be recognized as a neurodivergence. Whereas if it's normal, as in everyone's doing it, um, then well, yeah, then everybody's doing it and it's okay. We don't have to argue about that. We just need to recognize that the severity and the impactfulness of how it affects people's lives is different for ADHDers and for autistic people.
You find it's harder dealing with different generations to explain this to some people. For example, not to not to be, but
Mm,
baby boomers versus like
mm,
alphas versus
mm,
Generation Z. I'm an Xer, is Generation
mm,
X. I'm seeing a huge difference just in the
mm.
culture. If I talk to someone who's a baby boomer, they're like, "Oh no, you're fine. We all have a little of something, and just tough it
Just get
out,
through it.
get
Work a
through
bit
it,
harder.
work harder, and it's like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah,
In
uh,
in the same way as culture
it's
teaches
true.
us these
Uh,
rules, um, generational differences will teach us these rules, right? Because
Yeah.
boomers will have come from a time when that's how you saw the world. And at some point in our lives, we kind of let go of learning more because we're comfortable and we're full. We're full of the knowledge that we needed, and now we don't need anymore, so we don't go learning anymore. So we don't
Mhm.
see the world in new ways every day anymore. Aha, here's mindfulness again. Because if you do intentionally go into the world with beginner's eyes, with kind curiosity, you are much more likely to be on the minute with what's going on than if you are somebody who completely shuts yourself off
I
from the
like,
rest of the world.
I like
Um, and you're
put,
quite happy with what's going on, right? You're content with what's
Mhm.
going on. Then you're not going to learn anything and you're going to always repeat the rules and the beliefs that you've seen in your time. Whereas if you're open to it, it doesn't matter what age you are, you're going to be aware of what's going on around you.
Beautiful. Well, we have a few minutes left, so I wanted to give the last like 5, 10 minutes for you to just share anything you want
Yeah.
with us. I'm really curious about your group too. You could just give us a little idea about what it is and what you
Hmm.
offer again, just because some people might be tuning in late. And then, yeah, just like how to reach you. That'd be
Hmm.
great.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Thank you. So there are two opportunities a year to come and take part in a mindfulness course with me, and I do it online, so you get to do it in your pajamas if you want. You can do it from home, you can do it from your office, wherever you've got time. It's an 8-week course. It runs in February and from February and from September every year. In those 8 weeks, we learn what mindfulness is, but we don't just learn mindfulness, we learn it with other ADHDers. So it means that if you need to get up and wander about while you're doing it, nobody else is going to go, sit still, right? If you need to bring your crochet or your fidget or your mala or whatever you need to bring to keep your hands busy, everyone else is going to be doing the same thing. And if you have a question that in these circumstances would be okay to ask, but maybe wouldn't be if you were in a room full of neurotypical people, this is the place to do it. So I'm not reinventing the wheel. I am teaching people mindfulness, but I'm also allowing people to give themselves permission to do it their way. You don't have to sit for 45 minutes in order to be mindful. It helps. The more you do it, the more it settles in you. But there are other ways of doing it. You can incorporate your movement, you can incorporate your body, you can incorporate whatever way helps you to focus on yourself, to be able to be mindful. And if you do it in a group, you can see that other people have a variety of ways of doing that. So it's not just one way. It takes the 8 weeks. At the end of the 8 weeks, we then have a catch up, maybe a month, 6 weeks afterwards, to see how everybody's doing with their home practice, so that we can get some kind of community sense from everyone, so we can get some kind of feedback from each other about how we've been experiencing it. Because it's not supposed to be just for 8 weeks. It's supposed to be for life. And the benefits people can get from mindfulness, anyone can get from mindfulness, is so enormous that I want this for people who are ADHDers. The possibility of being able to take a breath instead of automatically reacting, um, is is very tantalizing when it's been bringing you all kinds of difficulty because you've been acting um, out of uh, in autopilot, right? Being able to have a little break from the thousands of thoughts that are going on in your head, not making your head quiet. Let me just say that really loudly. You're not making your head go quiet. What you are doing is picking a thought if you're going to be paying attention to thoughts.
Mm.
or picking a sensation, if that's what you're going to do. The thoughts are still doing their whirlpool around your head, but you get to be the quiet bit in the middle, allowing that to be there without getting in the middle of it, without getting involved in it.
Mm.
Um, and those things bring more emotional regulation. Those things bring better focus. They can bring better sleep.
Mm.
Um, they can bring major changes in relationships. And they can get you to know yourself so much better and have a much better and more compassionate relationship with yourself.
Mm.
Remember, there's that word again, compassionate relationship with yourself, where you understand your boundaries, where you know what you need, but you also know what your capabilities are. So yeah, that's what we do two times a week. And the people that were on the last one totally loved it. The comments you'll be able to see on my website if you go on there. Um, People really, really benefited from it.
Mm.
And it's not just them, of course. When they benefit, their family benefits, the people around them benefit, and everyone else benefits too. So it's not too far-fetched to say you can come and change the world.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, do you I was gonna ask a specific about the course. Do
Mm,
you offer within the context of the course any kind of music or arts
mm.
tie into it therapeutically with this strategy? Where like
Not,
I'm a type of person who like I want to know what works for me. Like is there
yeah.
like a trial and error kind of thing?
So what we'll do is I'll say I'll explain a practice to the participants, and then I'll give them a whole like a menu of different things they could try if they like. And I will say, come and surprise me. Tell me what you tried that wasn't on the list. We're learning from each other as time goes on, right? So if making a mark on a sheet helps you to stay in the moment while you're practicing, go do that. You know yourself best. And if you don't, you're going to find out as you do this. Be curious about yourself.
Mm.
It's just because I said, um, curl your toes up when you're breathing in and curl your toes down when you're breathing out, doesn't mean that's the only way that you can move. It doesn't mean it's the only way you can use your body to remain in the moment. Um, and so, yeah, if your interest is something different from what I've been suggesting in the class, fill your boots. Come and tell us about it. Pictures are even better.
Mm. Sounds very organic and a safe place. I think a lot of people
Yes.
are looking for that, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the one thing that makes this so much different from other mindfulness classes is that we understand that not everyone's going to be able to sit for half an hour. We understand that all of us are very different. And that doesn't mean better or worse. That means different.
Mm-hmm.
Variety is real, and it's important that there is variety because otherwise we wouldn't have an ecosystem. We wouldn't have a society. We'd all be the same. Oh, how boring. Uh, and so I want people to come as their whole real self. And if they haven't when they turned up, usually they leave as their whole real self.
Beautiful. Yeah, this has been wonderful, very informative for me too. I'm excited to share the message around. I'm glad that,
Yeah,
you were able to come on today and
thank you. It's the website is rewiretherapy.co.uk. And something important to say is I'm not licensed to work as a therapist in the US.
Mhm.
You have different laws in the US from what we have, so I can't help anyone with that. But mindfulness, I can help you with that as long as the timing works out, because it's usually evenings. It's usually 7 p.m. GMT or BST, 7 p.m. at night on a Thursday. So you need to work out your time zone and see if that's going to work. However, if there's enough Americans who say, I really quite fancy coming to your class, then I could see if I could make a class at a different time to accommodate that.
And then do you have sessions going on all year round, like once a month or once a week or something like that, or no?
Because I'm so busy with the therapy, I have learned to conserve my energy. So no, I don't have all of
Good
that
for you.
going on. I know, look at me with my halo, ding. Um, but it's important that I give myself that praise because nobody else is going to say, "Oh, isn't it great that you're resting?" Um,
That's
so
true.
no, that's why I only run these two courses twice a year. I am looking at ways to expand that. I am looking at ways of making that more accessible all round, all year round. But right now, because I'm doing a lot of one-to-one therapy, there isn't a time for it. It's changing. and I'll let you know. Shall I send you a message if it
Yeah.
changes?
Yeah. Always evolving. You never know. Well, I do. I love the authenticity and just the organic flow. It sounds like you have, and just the safe atmosphere. I feel it already, it's good
Mm,
vibes all around.
No, thank you. It's really lovely to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I'm sure, there's all kinds of possibilities. So if people are thinking about something that they would really like that isn't out there, let me know if there's a way I can do it compassionately within my boundaries, then I'm going to do it. Um, because that's what we're here for. We're all just here to be the best we can be and make the world a better place.
That's right. One step at a time, one day at a time. Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Well, beautiful. Thank you. I'll let you go and enjoy the rest of your evening there. What time is
Thank
it
you.
there? I'm just
It is nearly 10 to 11.
okay. So
It's a
getting late.
long day. I'm
Whew, take
I'm
a
I'm
breath.
going to give myself 5 minutes to ground and then I'm going to bed.
Okay. Well, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. I know the
It's
time
been a
wasn't
right
perfect for
pleasure.
you, but it was great for me. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I've loved it. Thank you. Thank you for letting me
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Um,
Well, take care. I'll
thank you.
stop the recording and then we can chat for a bit.
Thank you.